All right. All right, it looks like we're live. Double checking. There we go. Yep, we're good.
Okay.
All right. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is another live stream from the Christian Comic Arts Society. Today, we're joined by my good friend Ralph Miley, who is a comic book editor and publisher. He's founder of the New Creation Comics, where they publish such books as the Proverbs and Parables, the New Visions, and Ragged Capes. And I've been privileged to be part of one of those projects. Little bits of pieces there, but anyway, just thank you very much, Ralph, for joining us. So yeah, do you want to? I'm curious if you could just kind of give us a sense of the history that you've of your creative journey from where you started to the newer stuff that we'll end up talking about later today.
Well, I guess my creative journey started back in 1963. I'm dating myself. And the fact that my brother gave me an issue of Fantastic Four. It's Fantastic Four number 23 or 24. And it was the Hulk versus the Thing. And it was drawn by Jack Kirby, just this grandiose fight. And it was at that point, my addiction it started there. And so I would go to the comic store every month buying X-Men and Mutant Teen Titans and all of that. But then in 1976, when I got born again, I received Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And it seemed like there was this oxymoron, comic books and Christianity. You just did not, it didn't seem to mix from where I was at in church I went to, and I still enjoyed comic books. But in my church, there were no comic book fans. And so this mantra in which I had, in which I think a lot of Christians who enjoyed comic books had, was, I'm the only one. I mean, I'm the only Christian who enjoys comic books. And what happened was, as I was, going through my comic book addiction, I used to buy this newspaper. It was a monthly trade newspaper called the Comic Book Buyer's Guide. And in that, I saw an ad for Valiant, and it was produced by the Christian Comics Art Society. And Don Ensign was the editor of it. So I looked up Don's number and I called him up, and I just drilled him. I wanted to make sure, okay, then, is this a sect, or are you gospel centered? And from there, we had a really great friendship. And the Valiant Efforts was a news trade paperback produced by the Christian Comics Art Society, which look at comic books from a biblical worldview or a biblical perspective. And it ran for about 14 issues from like 1984 to 1986. And then about 1985, what Don did is that he decided to publish what was called an apazine, which is an amateur press association, and it was titled Alpha Omega. And it started about 1985. And what it was is that he would send that what an APA is that the members of it, that you have a membership, and they write reviews, they put in artwork, anything having to do with comic books. And then it would send it to a central mailer, and he would collate it and then send it out to the membership. And so now I found myself that I wasn't the only one. There were other Christians across the United States who loved comic books, but also loved Christ. And so as it began to fellowship and connect with each other, it was just, for me, a very satisfying fellowship. And especially being here in Southern California, I was able to meet with Don on a monthly basis, along with a couple other people, Jack Martin and Charles Whitley. And so we would meet like once a month just to talk comic books. And then what Don did is that he was involved in what's called small press. These are just small digest-sized comic books. And so he introduced me to small press, and my addiction was complete. it was kind of like, oh, oh, I love it. I mean, produce our own little comic books, our own little fanzine sized book. And I was in heaven. And so we started to produce these books called Valiant Efforts back in 1989. That's when it first came out. And it was that where my characters, the Street Fury story came up. And it ran for about 2 issues. And then we tried it again in 1991 and it went for about 2 issues. But what was really unique about it was that it brought Christians together, the work together on just a given project. It was first like Charles and Don and myself and Jack, and we worked together helping one another. And one of the things that really kind of like ministered to me, it was like Don embodied this passage of scripture. It is found in Philippians chapter 2, starting with verse 3. It says, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each one esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for your own interest, but also the interest of others. And Don embodied that, and that really resonated with me. And then what we do, we kind of like, then we got this idea. Why don't we go and make so it was like 1987, the Christian Comics Art Society had its first table at San Diego Comic-Con. It was in the small press area. And we've been there ever since. And we would go on to have tables at WonderCon and the Phoenix Comic Con. And it was just a really great experience. But also during that time, prior to that, we started another newsletter. It was Kevin. We met Kevin Young. And with Kevin, Don, and myself, we started another newsletter, similar to the Valiant newsletter, and that was called New Creation. And that went from like 1996 to 1998. It was about 13 issues. And again, we would look at comic books from a biblical worldview or a biblical perspective, but also we would talk to other Christians in the industry and connect with them and do interviews on them and highlight or spotlight some of the works in which they were doing. So we spotlight people like Jesse Ham and Harold Buckles, and we would have articles on them. And the networking just grew stronger. And that was one of the satisfying things that I found that I enjoyed about the CCAS, is that yes, we were Christians, but we were also such geeks. And that geekdom kind of like defied everything else. In other words, it didn't matter what denomination we belonged to. The only thing that was important is that you love God and that you could talk comic books. Nothing else mattered. It didn't matter what you were on the spectrum as far as your denominational belief. The only thing that was important, what was the best company, Marvel or DC? And what was happening was that at the Comic-Con, at the CCAS table, we had that opportunity to showcase small people who were in small press or people who just had a low print run, and we'd have all this Christian material at this table. And you talk about, alternate press, it was kind of like, oh yeah, we were definitely different. We were like the only one. And I would say 98% of our experiences with Comic-Con have been really positive. They've been wonderful tables and spots, and it's been good. Only there's like this one time we had what we would do is we had our Christian table and we had candy, right? That was to get the little kids in there, and then we can hand them a track. And this one little girl came and she was reaching for the candy bowl, and her mother looked and saw our sign, and she said to her daughter, "We don't take candy from them." And she dragged her daughter, but she go, "Mommy, but candy!" And she dragged her down the aisle, and the daughter was saying, "Mommy, but I want candy!" And her little voice kind of like dissipated in the crowd. And then another instance where the favor of the Lord was with us at Comic-Con. one time we missed it. And if you've ever tried to get a table at Comic-Con, if you miss the date, you're done.
Yeah.
And so we called them up and said, we missed the date. And they told us, okay, you're going to have to go to the bottom of the waiting list. And, you just praise the Lord, we messed up. If there is a way, if you want us there, you're going to have to open the door. And then not a day later, a couple of days later, they called up. He says, all right, then we're going to move you to the top of the waiting list. And that was just a divine move of God. And then a couple of days later, he says, all right, then a space is opened up for you, but it's next to Diablo Publishing. Will that be okay with you? We said, of course. And here we were, the Christian Comics Art Society and Diablo Publishing. And needless to say, we got along great. Yeah, the guy was Scott McCardle. And it was just a wonderful time of people would walk by our table and look at us and take pictures of it. And these are our experiences. But I think the greatest experience is that networking in which we were able to establish. One of our members, Kevin Young, who just a very gifted writer, yeah. Don said, hey, let's get together and let's publish something that Kevin wants to do. Because a lot of times when an idea of networking is that, all right, then how can you help me with my vision? But Don's philosophy was not how can you help me with my vision? How can I help you with your vision? And he would put his own projects aside, and he put his own project aside to help Kevin in 2000, in the year 2000. We did a book called New Crew, and it featured artists like Monty Wilson and Bud Rogers and Jesse Ham. And you did one of the chapters. Yeah. But that was the satisfying aspect of that venture, was that you had all these people coming together just so we could help our brother get published. And I think that was one of I think for me, one of the most attractive things about the Christian Comics Art Society and about what was happening. And all during this time in my journey, it's kind of like, we published the Street Fury one. It happened back in like 1991. That was the last time it was published. And I was good with that. It's like you have this desire to do something and you don't know if it's going to come to pass or not. You just enjoy doing it. You just enjoy allowing the creativity to flow through you because you just love comic books so much and you enjoy the whole process. You buy books on it. You study it. You go to the workshops just so you can learn about the craft. And that's where I was at. And that's where I think a lot of the people membership was just kind of like, how can we develop our craft and how can we help one another? And then what sprung forth out of that was Proverbs and Parables, which was published in 1998. Now, what it was is that we sent out a passage of scripture to different artists in the industry, and we asked them to illustrate that specific passage of scripture. In other words, that passage was their dialogue. They had the freedom to interpret it visually any way they wanted to, but they had to adhere to the scriptures as far as using that specific dialogue in that. They couldn't add anything else to it. And so with Proverbs and Parables, we sent it out and it went out to maybe 25 or 30 Christian artists. But for some reason, it just exploded. It just went out like it was like a firestorm. And then we had people calling us saying, how can I contribute to this publication? And we ended up having like over 70 Christian artists contribute. And that was like the first publication by New Creation Comics. But it was so gratifying because we had so many Christians involved in it. And this was, oh goodness, like I said, 1998. That's quite a while ago. That's 20 years ago. And I still have a few boxes of those sitting in my garage. It was also, that's when we, around year 2000, that's when we published New Crew. And that was another, that would be the second New Creation publication. Now, what would happen from then on, then about a few years later, then Don would go on to publish his own book. It was small press and it was called Valiant Efforts. And it was like, and this was like the third volume of Valiant Efforts. And that was in about 2012. And Don had his character Golden Protector as a part of that. And so what he graciously did, he said, he extended, he says, hey, Ralph, I want to include Street Fury in that, if that's okay with you. And so here it is. For the next time I would see Street Fury in publication would be 2012. And then, and also in 2013, Street Fury would actually have its own cover. And I was I was just all thrilled. I said, oh, I get to see that. And it was just such a wonderful experience, because for me, this creative process is like, I'm inviting you in. In other words, it's like, this is something that was on my heart to do. And it was like an invitation to the reader to say, I'm inviting you in to the creative process in which I'm going through. I'm not great, but it was part of me having that expression of that creativity in that form, because I just happen to love the superhero genre. And it was in that where people either enjoyed it or they didn't enjoy it. So like when you say Christian, you're going to have automatically a segment of the audience that's going to like dismiss it. Okay, then I don't want that. But that was good with me. Small press, you don't have these great aspirations. I used to aspire that I would be a comic book artist, and I would try out and send my applications and get my rejections, and try out and send my rejections. Then you go to the various portfolio reviews, and you see the artist, they go over there. Well, you need to do this and you need to do that. Yep, you got potential. And you do that for years, but nothing ever came of it. So I just ended up being a school teacher, and I taught art, and I loved it. It was just, for me, I taught middle school for 33 years, loved the students, loved the teachers, loved the school, and it provided for my family. But I always had this desire, just in the back of my mind, it would be nice, but I would never imagine it, going beyond being small press. And then in 2014, Don Ensign passed away. He went home to be with the Lord. And that was that impacted me, because he was one of my best friends. And he's actually the godfather of one of my daughters. We would go to the different conventions together and just spend hours driving to different cons and in the hotels. And if you ever been at hotels with comic book geeks, I remember one time at San Diego, we had a hotel. It was like a 1-bedroom, and we had about maybe 12 people in there. It was like the bathtub was like prime real estate to sleep. But that was the fun part of it. And in that you those relationships. That's how we met, like you said, Jesse Ham and Dave Porter and Kevin Young and Don Ensign and Nate Butler and Sergio Cariello, all of this networking, and we have helped each other, and we have been there and to support one another and to pray for one another. And that is, for me, the true value of the Christian Comics Art Society. And I think it's the true value of time in which you can come together. And so when your brother or sister is going through something and they share it with you, whether it be through the snail mail or the paper blog of Alpha Omega, or whether they do it on Facebook or or via email, it is your opportunity, it is our privilege to be able to bring them up before the Lord. And that's part of that really solid networking that I think flourishes. And that's why I enjoy the medium, because we get to do that. I still don't know some of the denominations of some of my brothers and sisters. Did they watch the last episode of Mandalorian? You know, that's the only thing that mattered to me. But this is what this has been all about. And as I've grown, as I've gotten older, and the Lord has been graciously working in my life, his timing is definitely not our timing, because we're finite. We make these plans, but how often does it really come to fruition, the plans that we make? Like we had these plans of working with Don, into it, just working with him for years and years and years to come. And then that was cut short. And you have these questions of the believers that kind of help us through that difficult time, that especially that difficult time for me, because I known Don, oh goodness, for 25 years, and we were close friends. And so it was that fellowship of the believers that kind of walked me through the grief process. And even though I still grieve behind it, I still miss him. If it wasn't for the fellowship that I have with the brothers and sisters in the CCAS, in Alpha Omega, and our monthly meetings that we've had in Southern California, I wouldn't have made it without the prayers of the people who were before me. And it is even more impactful in the sense that how the Lord has allowed me to enjoy this, because at one time I was battling prostate cancer, and I had to go through, oh goodness, weeks of radiation treatment and all of that. But people were praying for me. Christian Comics Art Society, people on Facebook, my church was praying for me. The people in the Alpha Omega were praying for me, and God just graciously heard their prayers, and now I'm doing well. But it's only by his grace and mercy. I don't understand it really, but it makes you very thankful for what God has allowed me to do, to be able to be a part of the CCS, to be able to share Christ at the different conventions and get these memories of sharing the gospel with other people. And you just don't know how God is going to work. It's kind of like you're going along for the ride. I tell some of my congregation, it's like going on a roller coaster ride. I'm just hanging on, for the dips and valleys. But it when I look back on it, it has been just so satisfying. And you get all these wonderful stories at Comic-Con as being the Christian Comics Art Society. You get these wonderful stories. As there was this time when we had our tracks, right? And Eric Jensen had this track called Are You Descended from a Monkey? And this guy came up, he looked at the track, and he laughed. He kind of like walked away. But then the next day, that same guy came back and kind of like on the slide, kind of like snuck some more tracks so that he could read them. Or then there was this one other time where this girl, she picked up the track and she started reading it. And her friend said, you know that's a Christian track, don't you? And she said, oh, it was like it was on fire, like it burned her hands. And she ran off. What a world. No, she didn't do that.
So wait, that's actually something I don't hear the term tracked that much anymore. And so maybe that's something to elaborate on. So when you say tracked, can you describe what that means? Like it's not as common.
As far as a track, it's like a short digest size. It could be a digest size comic book that shares the gospel. It could be anywhere from 8 to 12 pages, and it's specifically evangelistic in its nature. and so you hear about what are called the Jack Chick tracks, the little small tracks, God loves you, Holy Joe, and all of those would be considered tracks. Nate Butler has done tracks that have been distributed. Eric Jansen, the books that he has done for the Foursquare Mission Press would be considered tracks. And for us, they were comic book tracks because we were at a comic book convention. And that's something that they could relate to. They would come there and they'd see, oh, it's a track, but it's a comic book. And you could start conversation because you had something in common that you could talk to them and you could relate to them. I remember one time I just talked Deep Space Nine to this guy for about an hour. But the tracks are those things that specifically share the gospel.
Got it. So how long have you been involved with the Christian Comic Art Society? It started
in 1984.
1984, and that you guys fairly quickly were involved in the going to Comic-Con, right?
Yeah, we started going to Comic-Con probably around maybe a couple of years later as a group, but then we really started I would say meeting as a group is about 1995, 94, 95, where we would just meet and hang out. Nate Butler had a couple of spiritual themes and comics panels at the time. And so we were a part of that. And then in 1997, we just looking at there's a brother, George Makis, and he was having tables at the Chicago Con. I said, let's have a table at San Diego. And from there, we've been having tables there ever since. And during those times, we've established really, really solid relationships with the people at Comic-Con. And it is something to look forward to. But now I'm kind of older. It's kind of like, let the young people do it now.
Comic-Con has become like increasingly bigger and bigger over the years.
Yeah.
So it's like a sort of like as taxing as going on like a all-day backpacking trip.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And so for me, it was like almost every year from 1997 up to like 2018. Just hauling books and setting up and breaking down. And then in 2019, I just handed it off to some of the other people. I said, you can do it. And in 2019, I only went one day. That was Thursday. And I was good. I was fine with that.
Yeah. Well, it's been great having you at the cons, being there alongside you sometimes. It is genuinely a privilege, like these days, to even be able to get in the doors, to be able to have a table. Some people get on a list and never get in, and we've been blessed to be there for many years. So, well, let's kind of go a little bit towards the. So you mentioned the Proverbs and Parables and the New Crew. So you've continued to do some more publishing with New Creations beyond that. Is that right?
Yes. Kevin and I, we've been publishing the New Creation Comics. We published 2 issues of Ragged Capes, which is a depressing superhero anthology.
I think you should elaborate on that a little bit. I think that might give people the wrong impression.
Well, what it is we've just taken the superhero genre and just, to tell you, some of the stories are just so depressing. I mean, they're short chapters with different artists and different writers, and it's pretty bad. Eric has this one story in Ragged Cape, and I said, Eric, that is the depressing story I've ever read in my life. But it was so much fun, and our first one was like 2010, and then we had a long hiatus. But then we started publishing a little bit more regularly within the past, 4 or 5, 4 years. So we have, New Visions, that would be another one. And New Visions is an anthology in which we ask artists from around the world to see if they would be willing to contribute their artwork to that anthology. And we did that for 2 issues. And then we did Rag Capes for 2 issues. And then we've done a couple of books for Larry Blake, who was a small press publisher, just like a legend in small press in the small press arena. And we produced a couple of his books. And then after that, it was like all the years, they suggested, wait, why don't you do Street Fury? And so what I did was during the pandemic, when last March, since I was at home, that's what I did. I worked on Street Fury. And what I would do is I would submit it as part of my contribution to Alpha Omega, and they would give me their input. But then I would also send thumbnails and a script to people like Eric Jansen and Kevin Young, and another brother, Rob Marsh, just to get their input. And they would give me some insight, what they saw, what worked and what didn't work. And then I would take their suggestions into consideration. I would incorporate them into the story so that I would hopefully have a better story as a result of it. So during the pandemic, I was just cranking out stuff. It was such a blast. It was so much fun. And so I was doing short segments because I like doing stories. You have these grandiose stories that set these arcs that span over like several issues. My attention span is kind of limited. So I'll say, okay, then let me do a story anywhere from 6 to 12 pages. Each story would focus in on a character. And in that story, can I tell an effective story in that short amount of time? Can I communicate to the reader something that might be impactful in their life as they're reading this short story? I think one of the stories in which I read it was in a Green Lantern Corps called A Sense of Obligation. And it was like a 6-page story. And it was just so, I read it and it was kind of like, oh, this is good. Maybe I can start trying to tell stories. And so what it does is I'm able to get a story in a short amount of time. It might take maybe 3 months, but in 3 months, I have a complete story. And then I can go to the next chapter and then I work on that. And in 3 months, story. And then I go on to the next one and then tie them together. And the stories can range anywhere from, I would say, 6 to 10 pages. But what I do is I have a complete story. I do the thumbnails, I do the script, then I get an artist, to do it. Then I get a colorist, I letter it, and then Kevin, he kind of like he helps me out with that so much. And so what was happening, I had all these different stories that I completed, and it was kind of like, why don't you put them into a book? So the stories are like anthologies, but they're of characters in the Street Fury universe, which I have. And Kevin Young, he has a character in there called Virtue, and Virtue's, I love the character, and it fits so well, it flows so well into the story. I asked Kevin, can I use Virtue? And he said yes, and it flows into what I'm trying to communicate to the reader. And so when we put these stories together, I ended up like 3 issues. We took stories that we have from Rag Capes and stories that I did it, and it ended up being 3 issues. And I'm going, oh my goodness, I just would have never thought it. For me, it's overwhelming that the Lord would allow me to even see it, to see this thing that for me was just, I enjoy doing it, but to hold it in your hands and to see it and have it in your hand and read it, it is overwhelming because God has been gracious to me. It's nothing that I could say I earned or merited. He just been that kind to me. And I am just so thankful for his kindness that he would even allow me to just to see it. And for me, it's it's not for wide consumption because my characters are it's within a Christian, it's within a biblical worldview. And some people might like it and some people might, but I'm good. I'm old. I mean, I'm 65 years old. I feel like I'm beyond that part. It's kind of like God has this sense of humor. Like I became a pastor, senior pastor. I became a senior pastor at 59. I was like, I should be, it's kind of really, but it has been for me, the most spiritually satisfying experience that I've had. I've been telling people it's like 6 years, and I'm still on a honeymoon. And I've been allowed to pastor the La Mirada Foursquare Church. It has been such a rewarding experience for me, but this came at 59. And then here I am 65 and I'm seeing Street Fury in his first graphic novel. And even though it's kind of like, well, what about Caleb? He was old. And what about Moses? He was old. And what about Methuselah? He was old. But I wish I had the bravado of Caleb, because Caleb said, let's go for it. For me, I'm just thankful for each day that the Lord allows me and to see it and to witness it is something that I would have never, ever imagined. At least for me. It was relegated to, the small press digest size books. But the stories that I was writing in 1990, they were fun. But as I've, been involved in comic books and as I've matured, as I've gotten older, and I think in my experience as a pastor, I'm able to hopefully get a little bit more, I would say, depth to the character. Some of them are kind of abrasive, and some of them people won't like. It's kind of like, how could you do that? So, I'm old. I don't care.
Well, that's something I thought I'd go back and touch on. You mentioned Ragged Capes, your comment that it was depressing. I think that's not how I would describe it, but I think so I want to kind of go back to, you said, like, you're talking about telling stories where there's a little bit more depth to them, and and that these fairly short chapter stories all kind of have one, like little compartmentalized stories that sort of all kind of connect in a theme. But it seemed to me like, so I'm trying to see if I can characterize it. You tell me if I'm right. It seems like what you're trying to do is, like we were talking about this earlier, that like the process of telling a story where it seems like what as far as I can tell is you're trying to use some of your characters to sort of embody a viewpoint or a way of looking at things, like in a lot of the Ragged Capes, like it's like justice or and that if there's a way of looking or approaching that topic that is flawed or harmful, some of these characters will embody that, and like you said, they won't look great. It'll be like, wait a minute, there's a problem there, and so that can kind of end up not looking good in the story. So is that an accurate way of
Yeah.
how would you put that? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
That's exactly it's like they are flawed, and some of the characters, I get inspiration from people who I've known in my life, people who have been angry or people who are bitter, and you talk with them and you find out where that bitterness comes from or where that anger stems, and it's not always. And if I can communicate that within the story, it's not real pleasant. Flaws are not real pleasant. Even people within the stories, and like you said, they embody a certain aspect of how a person might feel. So if there's this anger there, they're like an embodiment of anger. Or if there is greed. They're like an embodiment of greed. And they are not what you would call, likable characters. Uh, but hopefully I would have communicated, okay, then there's more to their hatred than just the cultural influences. It could be family influences. It could be their life experiences that led them to where they're at. And so it's not really, I would say, pleasant. But when you look at the Bible, oh goodness, they're just so full of flawed people. And that's what what I try to do is, yes, we are flawed. The characters are flawed. Now, within the Christian construct, how do we portray that? Is it going to be all of a sudden, oh, I have a character in there who's just angry all the time? And they ask me, well, is she going to become a Christian? I say, no, not at all. That's the furthest thing from my mind. As a matter of fact, she despises Christianity, and this is not going to be your pat. I received Jesus and everything's all right. No, that's not the plan, because we know people like that. And we know people in our lives where Christianity is the furthest thing from their mind. And they don't want to embrace it. They don't want to embrace it. And we pray for people for years sometimes, and sometimes they never embrace it. And so that's the type of stories that they're real. That's the reality of it. But how do we approach it from a Christian perspective? How do we look at it? How do we address it?
Yeah. Well, it occurs to me, like what you're describing, like there are some stories, or there are characters in the stories that sort of embody some of these, like bitterness or anger, these ways of dealing with conflict or hardship, and their stories aren't very, their path in the story is often, you can look at it and go, oh no, that's not good. And I think it's refreshing to have something that actually points out the danger of something like letting bitterness become kind of the ruling factor in our lives, because all of us have to go through things that can provoke bitterness and anger, and the question is, like, what do we do? But it occurs to me as you're describing the question of, like, how do you present a Christian version of, like, addressing some of these things, the responses to the flaws, and it occurred to me that it's your approach kind of reminds me of somewhat of G.K. Chesterton's stories with Father Brown, where the constant refrain is Father Brown is acquainted with the problems and the sins and flawedness of the people he deals with, the criminals he deals with, and he keeps making the point, it's because he has that in himself already, and he knows what it's like, and the difference is that he has Christ to go to, and it seems to me like you guys take a similar kind of approach with your Christian character in the story. Am I
Yes,
somewhere in the ballpark there?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
So I find that refreshing, as I want to kind of articulate for those who haven't read it yet, that there are some light points in the middle of the darkness there. So it's not just it's all depressing. So yeah. So how about I just would like to kind of pull back just a little bit or maybe even go a little bit deeper, if you want, however you want to characterize it. Now that you have this books, like as I understand it, like you have the first book of Street Furies is out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that's you're seeing the fruit of that labor. Can you, like, back up a little bit and, like, look at, like you mentioned, you, like many other creative people in the middle of COVID restrictions, had this opportunity, right? We have a new like restrictions on our lifestyle, and we can do creative stuff. And I think a lot of us ran into challenges. It wasn't just like smooth sailing. Oh, this is super easy, I'm just going to go do my thing and everything works perfectly. I wish that was the case for everyone. So if you were going to characterize, like, what sticks out to you as, like, some of the most significant aspects of your of being creative in that kind of difficult context, and like what like difficulties or victory moments stick out to you as most significant about that creative process?
Well, one of the things, first, it kind of, it was like an idea popped. I hope it was God inspired, where it centered around a specific topic. Uh, it was, and so when that popped into my mind, I said, "Oh, all right, then how do I communicate that?" Then I ran it by a couple of my friends, like Eric and Kevin. And I ran it by them. I said, "This is what popped into my mind. What do you think about this as a thread within the overall story arc?" So I had people who I could bounce it off of, which is for me refreshing. It's brain. I like brainstorming because when you connect with somebody and then they ignite something and then you just start feeding off each other and it just grows and grows and grows. That was one of the things that it helped me during that time, was that I was able to find people who I was able to bounce these ideas off of, and they said, "Oh, that's great, that's wonderful." Another time where I had the story and I had like 3 different ways the story could go, and I wrote them out. And I'm saying, "Okay, I like that one, but I don't know." And so I was able to send options to the people who I share with, and they all liked the same option, but it wasn't the option I thought was the good one. But I thought this one, but they said they unanimously, without even conversing with each other, "Oh, we like this one." And I go, "But that's not the one I chose." But I said, I realized, okay, then I will go with that one. I will go with this because I respect their creativity. And I went with it, and it just began to flow from that point on. There was another character that I had, and it was Eric. He said, "I really like this character. You need to expand on this a little bit more." And I did, and it just made the story that much better. I only added an additional page, but that additional page added I think, such depth to the story, or at least it added another aspect to the story. You got like, "Oh, wow, this could go well." So that was helped me out. And again, because I was doing short segments, it was easy to accomplish something. I was able to get this sense of satisfaction. "Oh, I completed this." And when you complete something, it kind of like says to me that, "Oh, I'm done. Now I can go on beyond this." But because they were short segments, it gave me just gratification in a short amount of time. So it over a long period, I'd probably burn out. It's kind of like, "Oh God, oh man, 580-page graphic novel. I'm only on page 10." But with this one, but when I did it, it ended up being 3 issues over a year, over a period of a year, because they were short and because it was able for me I was able to say, and I could go on to the next story. And then I would run it by some people. And I'm even now working on a 4th issue, and I ran it by some people, and I'm going to start including it in Alpha Omega to run it by them. I'm working on the thumbnails, and then you learn more about it. So I'm starting a 4th issue. I don't know whether I'm going to finish it or not. At least I got 3 gone. At least I have 3 completed. But that in that time, but also I think that for me, it was a time in which I could focus in on prayer also. My private time with the Lord was foundational in that I could go to my time in devotional of prayer and reading the Word of God, and then I could ask Lord, "Can I work on my story?" And He said, "Go right ahead." It's kind of like I got this green light to go ahead. Sometimes you get like a red light or yellow light or a green light. Like if you get a green light, I'm going for it. If you get a red light, it's like, oh, don't do it. Or if you get a yellow light, just kind of proceed with caution. In that. And so there were times where I got a little red lights, just got no hold off on it. You get a little bit too obsessed with it. Okay, then I'd have to pull back from it because I found myself spending maybe more time than I should and not balancing it out with other responsibilities. But I want to make sure that I did give it, I was allowed to get that much time, because sometimes the creative process, it takes time. But just trying to balance it out with my own spiritual health, but also my own creative health. And I think creativity is healthy, and expressing creativity is healthy.
Yeah.
For us.
Yes, I mean, I'm curious about that because I'm interested in that. I've experienced something similar myself, I think, and I actually heard an interview with Brandon Sanderson, who's a writer. He was saying like how he writes a bunch, and his wife was telling him at some point he was not writing, and his wife was telling him like, "Are you writing?" And he's like, "No, I haven't been writing for a while." She's like, "You need to go write," so, which I think like it kind of is a demonstration of like. Yeah. What he's like when he's writing is healthier and he's better than when he's not. And that seems to be true for me as well.
Yeah, same here. And what's been particularly gratifying is the slide. I've only got her to go to one convention in the 37 years we've been married. One. But as we've gotten older, she's just been, for all the cons, she said, go hang out with your geeky friends. So when we had our monthly meetings, go hang out with your geeky friends. I need a break. Or especially during Comic-Con, because my daughters would go with me. She goes, go, take them. I'll get a quiet house. And we would go to that. But even now, she's been so supportive of it, because I hire artists and colorists, and I come out of my own pocket. I just save a little bit each month, every month, and it takes me about maybe 3 months to save enough to pay. And she just says, okay, then how much are you going to set aside this month? How much are you going to set aside this month? And she's allowed me to set this money aside to put forth this project. And she's been doing it for the past couple of years. It says, okay, then how much you going to set aside? And it's like one of those things. So that for me, that's what makes it even more, how I would say, if I can find the word for it, fulfilling, is that she's full support of it.
That's great. That is awesome. And that reminds me of like, I think a lot of creative types, people who are gifted with some sort of creativity or interested in some sort of creativity, sometimes find that their relationships are with people who don't get it. And and since it sounds like you have like, your wife has been very supportive, which is awesome. And it sounds like she's not one of the people who are into this sort of thing.
Not at all.
Do you guys have any, do you feel like you've learned something over the years that like some keys to like how to navigate that? Because I think there are probably a lot of people in this position who are in a similar position trying to learn how to navigate that geek versus non-geek sort of.
As a non-geek, she's just kind of like, that's just not her thing. But I think, since retirement, I've picked up gardening, and she loves it. She loves that I've picked up gardening. I've been taking care of her plants. And then I think she's been just more receptive, and I've been picking other things that she enjoys doing. But she always knew that I loved it. But she also knew that she didn't have to worry about this coming before her or the family. It wasn't like there was this danger of me being so consumed with it and that it would become detrimental to our relationship. She never had to worry about that. She was always assured in that, the time that I spent in that creative process was never going to interfere or never going to come between my love for her or my love for my family. That they were like the priority in that. And so now, with my children being older and being, leaving, going out the house, got one more to go, it's kind of like, okay, then the money we have now, you can spend toward stuff that you like, and we can spend it toward stuff that I like. And then that has been one of the gratifying things about being retired, because the money we used to spend on our kids, we can spend it on the things that we enjoy doing.
Yeah. Well, I just want to honor something that, like you mentioned earlier, and it just sort of, you mentioned it here, and I think they connect. It seems to me like being an artist, one of the voices you hear in the creative, circles is that, like, you have a desire in your heart, just follow that desire, do it, whatever is in your heart, you just follow that. And I think, being a Christian, I think there's an additional piece to that, where we recognize that not all the desires in our heart are good. And so, and it sounds to me like one of the things you're mentioning here is that your wife and your family are aware that you've already identified that, like, creativity is not the driving thing that trumps every other concern or responsibility. And I think that that bears honoring. I want to honor that. To me, that is a piece that can sometimes get out of whack. And you mentioned earlier how you would pray about whether it's taking too much, pulling you too much one way or the other. And so I just want to honor that. Like, that is an important piece, it seems to me.
Yeah, it's important because, like you said, creativity is good, but so is eating. Eating is good. I love to eat, but as you know, we can eat wrongly. We can love wrongly. We can eat wrongly. It can splinter off into something that's unhealthy with our eating or in our loving. And I think the same thing is with our creativity. I think our creativity is something that's good. It's something that God has given us that we can enjoy, but we have to guard it, just as we can eat wrong, and we can let our creativity branch off into something that's unhealthy, that can be detrimental to us or our relationship with God and with our family. And we need to be aware of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, this is like, now as I start to go, oh, let's talk more about that. But we're running out of time. So, so I just want to honor the time we set it at the end at 7. So, thank you very much, Ralph, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Maybe we can do it again and we can talk more. But just for the moment, you mentioned the Street Theory or any other projects that you're working on. You want to give us where can people find you or your projects online so they can find out?
Then where they can go to is www.newcreationcomics.com. You can find all our publications there, and there will be a link there, and you can buy them on Amazon. But if you go to www.newcreationcomics.com, you'll see all the publications that we have available from New Creation.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ralph.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so honored.
Yeah. Thank you. And hopefully we'll do this again.
All right, then.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Talk to you later.